A perpetual bestseller for Honda and indeed one of the best-selling vehicles in the country, the Honda Civic is all new for 2022. Now in its 11th generation, Honda says this is the most refined and sophisticated Civic yet. But are they right? Well, today we're going to hit the road and find out. For the past 20 years, Honda has consistently relied on the same formula when developing a new Civic. They alternate in generations between revolutionary and evolutionary. And interestingly, it's the even-numbered gens, 6th gen, 8th gen, and 10th gen, that are the revolutionary ones. They bring new engines, new philosophical ideas about what the Civic can and should be. Then, the ones that follow are the evolutionary takes on those models. The 7th gen, the 9th gen, and now this 11th gen Civic. But in this case, evolutionary rather than revolutionary is a good thing, because the 10th gen Civic had a lot going for it. It was bigger, more spacious, more technologically equipped, and crucially had all the right hardware for the job. It was potent, introducing turbocharged powertrains to the Civic lineup. It was incredibly fuel efficient, cracking 40 mpg. And it was a pretty good handler as well. I would go as far as saying that in this compact car class, the 10th gen Civic was kind of the one to look at in terms of dynamics. While competitors like the Mazda 3 were reverting back to simpler, cheaper torsion beam rear suspensions, Honda went all in on a 10th gen Civic to make it more dynamic. I remember all the technical data they gave us on the release of that vehicle. It's all geared towards how they improved the dynamism of the car, how they were fine-tuning spring rates and sway bars and trying to reduce friction in the suspension to make it handle more neutrally and naturally. And the end result was, well, a car that handled quite nicely. I've been lucky enough to drive most every variant of the 10th gen Civic, from base models all the way to the Civic Type R, and they were all quite nice driving vehicles. And so, for this 11th generation model, because they are working with quite a lot of the same basic hardware, less of the focus this time has been put on absolute sportiness and dynamism, but instead focusing on refining the experience with some dynamic improvements along the way. The engines that are available right now are a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4, and the upgrade, a 1.5-liter turbocharged 4. Basically the same engines you get in the 10th gen, but refined. The big news is with the 1.5T here. This is the meat and potatoes engine that is found now in a lot of Honda products. Power is up to 180 horses, and crucially, a 15 pound-foot of torque bump up to 177 pound-foot that Honda claims comes in pretty much across the entire power band. And the difference is noticeable right away. That extra torque that really comes in around 2,000 RPM and just keeps on pulling really makes this thing feel nice and punchy. But it's more than the power bump, because Honda also worked to refine this engine. Now, the 1.5T was a little bit grainy in the previous Civic. It was just a little bit coarse. You know, it's a small displacement 4-cylinder with direct fuel injection. It didn't necessarily sound the best. And don't get me wrong, this is not really a symphonic engine by any stretch of the imagination, but it does sound and feel much smoother. Though, part of that absolutely comes from the transmission. Now, interestingly, in the Civic Sedan, you can only get it with an automatic transmission. In this case, a continuously variable unit. Again, pretty much a carryover from the last Civic, though Honda says they've again tweaked and tuned it to be more refined. But don't worry, because Honda is a stalwart ally in the crusade to #save the manuals. You can still get a manual transmission in the Civic hatchback, which Honda says is the more enthusiast-geared body style. Also, like the previous gen Civic, this new model can crack 40 mpg, asterisk there, as long as you have the right trim level. because this is a fully loaded Touring, ooh, nice leather and this and that, the extra weight does compromise the MPG slightly. EPA ratings of 31 MPG city, 38 MPG freeway, and 34 MPG combined, though, are still very competitive in this segment. For those curious, I averaged a real-world figure of 30.5 MPG, which is in line with those EPA estimates, but slightly lower because I drive like a dickhead. So looking beyond the powertrain for a second, which overall is absolutely an improvement, let's talk about some dynamic stuff. Honda says they've really focused on reducing friction in the suspension. And what they really focused on is stuff like bushing tuning and ball joints, smaller stuff like that. Now, if that sounds kind of boring at first glance, don't let your eyes glaze over yet, because like I've talked about on this channel when tuning my own cars, whether it's for the street or the track, reducing friction in the suspension, whether it's suspension binding in those bushings or friction of the ball joints, allowing those controllers to articulate more freely, pays dividends as far as the driver is concerned, because it makes the handling of the car more fluid and consistent. However, this new model also comes with about a 100-pound weight penalty compared to the outgoing Civic. This fully loaded Touring weighs in at just under 3,100 pounds, which again is not enormous, but an extra 100 pounds is not inconsequential in the dynamics department. Still, this thing is fluid in a winding road like I'm on right now, and it does handle quite nicely for a plain Jane Civic. You know, this is not an SI or a Type R, but still, this is a nice driving vehicle. And this thing would absolutely show a Mazda 3 its taillights before leaving it in the dust up here. But let's talk about some truly important stuff, because most people aren't up here thrashing through a canyon road in their Honda Civic every day. They're instead sitting in traffic and commuting around town. And this is really where Honda has strove to make this the best Civic yet. Thanks to a 1.5-inch wheelbase stretch, this thing is extremely comfortable on the open road. It truly does cruise quite nicely on the interstate. Also, it is quieter than the 10th gen Civic, and fortunately for me, I have the virtue of having an almost identically spec'd 10th gen Civic sedan in my driveway, because that's what my fiance's daily driver is. So it is very interesting hopping in these two cars that are almost identical, powertrain, layout, options, dollar for dollar, and seeing the changes back to back. Now, originally I was going to include her vehicle in this video, but one of Los Angeles' finest drivers decided to rear-end her car a few days before this video, which was very kind of him. Still, the big takeaway is that this Civic is more grown up. The caliber of the materials is much higher in here. This will actually give a Mazda 3 a run for its money in that department, because previously that was the best in segment in terms of fit, finish, and feel. I like the tactility of everything in this interior in particular, like these dials. Can you hear this in the video? Oh, it's very satisfying. It's a nice tactile feel. And on the higher trim level of Civics, they've finally given it the updated infotainment screen, which is right behind the camera here. I'll cut to a shot of it. It's a 9-inch system, basically what you get in the Accord, and it is quite nice. It's simple, but it works. It's this nice combination of a touch screen with buttons and knobs, which is what you want. And while the standard 7-inch screen is fine, it has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto connectivity, this 9-incher is definitely the one you want. So you gotta upgrade like an EX trim or above, because not only is the screen and interface nicer, bigger, but you also get wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, and in the case of this Touring model, wireless phone charging right down here. And don't forget the variety of other standard luxuries you would expect from a fully contented model, like heated leather seats, a sunroof up here, and niceties like that. This is a very nicely equipped vehicle. Though over 29 grand, it absolutely should be. I also like that they cleaned up the interior in quite a lot of ways. The 10th gen Civic had a sort of tiered, stacked waterfall center console, which offered quite a lot of storage, but was very clumsy when you were driving to kind of reach your hand where it needed to go. They've cleaned and simplified this setup, so again, it's, I guess, slightly less spacious overall, but has more usable working space, like this deep pocket down here for the wireless phone charging and just general storage. Again, everything you interact with falls to the hand very intuitively in here. You don't have to hunt around for anything. Everything is exactly where you'd expect it to be in this vehicle. I think overall, Honda has done a great job here in designing the next generation Civic. In most every way, it's an upgrade over the outgoing model. So for dedicated Honda buyers, they'll be pleased in that regard. This is a much more premium experience than the outgoing Civic. However, for shoppers who are not quite as brand conscious, this does seem to be at the front of the pack. In terms of fit, finish, and materials, this is now on par with the Model 3, but it has better utility and usability in my mind. Then alternatives like the Toyota Corolla just seem kind of cheap by comparison. They don't seem nearly as luxury minded. Like the VW Golf, which is quite a nice vehicle in my opinion, you will pay a slight premium to match what this thing can offer as standard right out of the box. And so yes, the 11th gen Civic is an evolutionary take over the revolutionary 10th gen Civic. That's a good thing because they've just improved, even if it's a small amount, tangibly most everything you care about in this vehicle. And overall, this thing is fantastic. Though, as a die-hard car enthusiast, I have to say, Honda, bring on the SI and the Type R. We're waiting. Alright guys, I think that's all I got for this one. My name is Jake. You've been watching Drive, Break, Fix, Repeat, and I'll see you guys next time where I go do more fun things with cars. Bye!